He's shooting at us, a couple of the other guys were shooting. It was just chaotic.
He was in the Afghan army, but he gunned down 3 Australian soldiers. Was it a spontaneous attack, or was it planned?
But it was a planned terrorist attack.
The inquiry officer found there was no intelligence available to suggest there was a specific insider threat.
So how did it happen?
I think that meant that maybe corners were cut.
The ultimate betrayal of trust. Welcome to the program. Every Australian soldier's death while fighting in Afghanistan over the 12 long years of war has been heartfelt. But there's a particular pathos about those where the enemy was supposed to be a friend. The training of Afghan forces was fundamental to the coalition's whole purpose in being in the country and to the Australian purpose in Uruzgan province. It came at a big cost. Of the 41 Australian deaths in Afghanistan, 7 were not from field combat, but from so-called green-on-blue attacks by Afghan National Army soldiers being trained and mentored by the Australians. Tonight's program focuses on the night of August 29, 2012, when a lone Afghan National Army sergeant shot and killed 3 of his Australian mentors while they played cards. An Australian Defence Department inquiry with heavily censored evidence failed to satisfy the families of the 3 men. This is a story of their fight to see the full truth about responsibility aired through a civil coronial hearing in Queensland, which has just finished. This report from Quentin McDermott.
Lance Corporal Stefan Milosevic, 2nd 14 Light Horse Regiment, age 40. Sapper James Martin, 2nd Combat Engineer Regiment, age 21. And Private Robert Pote, 6th Battalion, the Royal Australian Regiment, aged 23. Died on Wednesday, 29 August 2012, serving their country, the people of Afghanistan, and above all else, their mates.
In August 2012, Australia's troops suffered their worst day on the battlefield since Vietnam.
Stefan Milosevic.
In the space of 12 hours, 5 men died. 2 soldiers from the Special Operations Task Group were killed when their helicopter crashed.
To our brothers in arms in Task Force 66, we share your grief for your loss, and we thank you for your support and mateship.
May they rest in peace. May they enter eternal life.
And in a cowardly act of betrayal, 3 more soldiers were murdered by an Afghan army sergeant they were helping to train. The grief felt by their mates was palpable.
He was never shy of telling you how it was. Milo, we'll miss you, mate. Goodbye.
Mardo, our BRIC combat team, and indeed the world, are a lesser place without you. We are proud to have known you and to be able to call you our mate.
Purdy was a very smart and switched-on soldier. He'll always be missed. Rest in peace, brothers by choice.
To Milo, Mardo and Pody, we bid you clear skies and fair winds for your final journey home. We will remember you.
Tonight, Four Corners confronts the Afghan soldier who murdered Milo, Marto and Poti.
I'm hoping you could explain why you did this action.
And the soldiers' families challenged the army over whether senior commanders did enough to protect the men.
If a bullet is coming your direction with your name on it, well, that's it. You would be devastated. The families are going to be devastated. But we accept the risk. In this case, I believe the incident was preventable. It was due to incompetence and negligence, and that's the big difference.
Hugh Pote's son Robbie was 23 years old and had seen less than 3 months active service when he was killed. Robbie Pote joined the army in 2009 and excelled in training as a Bushmaster crew commander.
His leadership skills were exceptional. And it's very unusual for a junior soldier of only 3.5 years to be, firstly, a crew commander of a Bushmaster, and secondly, when he went to Afghanistan in war, he was the lead vehicle in their convoys and patrols.
Bushmasters, like the one commanded by Robbie Pote, would ferry infantry in and out of remote, heavily fortified patrol bases. The vehicles were armoured, but not immune to landmines or IEDs, the deadly, improvised explosive devices which were hidden in walls or by the sides of roads, and which could be triggered remotely by insurgents as the troops passed by. Sapper James Martin enlisted in the army in 2011. Along with Robbie Pote, he was deployed to Afghanistan in June 2012, where, as a combat engineer, he was tasked with the extremely hazardous job of searching for IEDs. His mother, Suzanne, was well aware of the heavy burden of responsibility borne by her son.
He was very realistic about the fact that, he could be killed or injured. I mean, he was a searcher, so the chances of that happening were pretty high. But he did have a strong ethos that he was there to save lives. The lives of his mates, he would put his life on the line for the sake of his mates, and all of them do.
They led. They were out the front with that mine detector or the probe, trying to find a safe path. This was really an IED war. So the engineers, I think, are utter heroes, and the engineer regiment of which he was a part have taken a very, very heavy toll in this battle.
The third digger to die in the lethal insider attack was Lance Corporal Stjepan Milosevic, known as Rick to his family and Milo to his comrades. Milo was 40 years old. He joined the army 4 years earlier and, like Robbie Pote, was deployed to Afghanistan as a Bushmaster crew commander. He was on his second tour of duty after earlier serving in Iraq.
He joined up late, didn't he?
He did. He had a midlife crisis. It was something that he'd always wanted to do, and he felt that he needed to do it. He was changed for the better. He was happy. He was finally doing something that he was good at, and he was very happy to do it.
I had a chance to meet Milo in Iraq in 2010.
Major General John Cantwell is a former commander of Australia's forces in Afghanistan and the wider Middle East.
And he stood out to me because he was older than the rest of the guys. They were quite a small team, and I got to know them well. And I had the privilege of pinning onto Milo's chest his Iraq campaign medal when he finished his tour of duty in Baghdad. So I knew him. And when I saw the headlines and then saw the photo and the name, it was really painful.
When John Cantwell commanded Australia's troops in Afghanistan, a key part of the multinational mission was to train, advise and support the Afghan National Army, or ANA. The emphasis was on mentoring the Afghan army so that Australian troops could start handing over combat and internal security responsibilities before eventually pulling out.
Well, our main aim was to train the Afghans and to get them to fight and die for their country, as opposed to Australians and others fighting and dying for Afghans. And that mission was absolutely central to our whole strategic aim.
By its very nature, mentoring the ANA meant Aussie diggers getting close to Afghan soldiers and building an atmosphere of trust and close collaboration.
So if you got to know the people that you were fighting alongside, that you were training, and spent time, around a cookpot, sharing a cup of tea, playing a bit of soccer. That happened all the time, almost every day, inside the far-flung patrol bases out in the valleys of Uruzgan province. And it worked, because the relationships that the Australians enjoyed with the Afghans were mostly positive, and that built trust.
But the trust began to be seriously undermined when a spate of insider attacks was carried out by Afghan army soldiers on troops from ISAF, the International Security Assistance Force. In 2011, 3 Australian diggers were gunned down and 7 more wounded at a parade. The deaths brought the hazards of mentoring into sharp perspective.
I think there's a sense of shock on the part of soldiers when people they thought were allies turn on them. It then means that you no longer trust the people that you're supposed to be working with, and it just drives a wedge between you.
There's a fatal paradox, isn't there, in the nature of mentoring, that in order to mentor effectively, you have to get close to the soldiers you're trying to help. But the closer you get, the more vulnerable you become to insider attack.
I think that's a reasonable summary. It does all revolve around trust. And trust is built and sustained and grown through more and more interlocking activities.
He's a Superman, man.
At some point, the risks attached to that also grow. But even so, I can't see how a mentoring mission, one built on training and getting the Afghans to lead their own security operations, could have been achieved without that sort of close interaction.
Pierce. Don, mate.
In 2012, as ISAF mounted a surge in the recruitment and mentoring of ANA soldiers, so the number of insider or green-on-blue attacks increased.
The areas where they've had the problems have been essentially where the soldiers are in the army reluctantly. They don't want to be there, they want to go home, and they resent the foreigners being there, and it's a different situation entirely for them.
Some green-on-blue attacks were motivated by cultural and religious anger. When US soldiers at Bagram Air Base inadvertently burned copies of the Quran in February 2012, violent protests ensued, prompting an abject apology by the US and ISAF commander in Afghanistan, General John Allen.
We are thoroughly investigating the incident, and we are taking steps to ensure this does not ever happen again. I assure you, I promise you, this was not intentional.
In Afghanistan, Robbie Pote, James Martin and Rick Milosevic served with mentoring team Bravo at the forward operating base where just 10 months earlier 3 Aussie diggers had been gunned down in a green-on-blue attack. Despite this, in phone calls home, relations with the Afghan army were reported to be good.
They seemed to get on well. The mingling was limited, but yeah, they were quite happy to play cricket and they seemed to have quite good fun.
I'd said to him one day, look, I'm really concerned about these insider attacks, these green-on-blues. How do you find the Afghan National Army guys that you're mentoring? And he said, they're a fantastic mob of guys. He said, they're no problem. We play cricket together and what have you. We're fighting the same enemy.
On August the 28th, 2012, James Martin, Robbie Pote and Rick Milosevic joined a 24-man platoon which left the forward operating base at Sork Bed and made its way via the multinational base of Tarin Kop to patrol base Wahab. Wahab is a remote outpost 23 kilometers north of Tarin Kot in the Baluchi Valley. It was unfamiliar territory, and none of the soldiers had visited the base before.
Wahab was not within their original tactical area of responsibility. It was the tactical area of responsibility of Mentoring Team Delta.
Patrol Base Wahab is in the Taliban stronghold of Darafshan. Four Corners is the first film crew to enter the base and film here. The platoon was on a 10-day mission as part of a mentoring surge designed to help the Afghan army coordinate with other bases in the region. It was a hazardous area in which to operate.
This was a particularly sharp spot to be. So I don't know if it was more prone to insider attacks, but it was certainly a place where there was a significant and active Taliban presence and some sympathies locally to the Taliban objectives.
On August the 29th, in the searing heat, the platoon went out on patrol with their Afghan army colleagues. During the day, they found an explosive device.
It was quite a big device, so if it did go off, it would have hurt a lot of people. We checked it out, and it was too big for our engineer, Brick Commander, to detonate, so we called the Americans in to come and blow it up.
The men were fully kitted up in 48-degree heat, and when they returned to base that afternoon, they were allowed to remove their body armour and helmets, change into PT gear, cool down and relax.
The minute we were told that we were allowed PT gear, I don't think I could have changed any quicker. It was just such relief to get out of the gear. Everyone just jumped at the opportunity, and we all stripped down and got changed as soon as possible, really.
Patrol Base Wahab is a small, narrow space. Realising it was impossible to set up a separate, secure area, the platoon commander told his men to park their armoured vehicles near the entrance and set up camp against the blast-proof walls. The Australians set up a makeshift gym, and some of the Afghan soldiers wandered over to join them and swap patches. As night fell, Milo, Mato and Poti joined other diggers relaxing under a tarp next to one of their vehicles, and an armed guard or roving picket was assigned to protect the men against attack.
There was a group of 6 or 7 of us playing a board game and another group playing cards. We were playing our board game, having a great time. We were all just laughing, and it was just a really relaxed time.
Some guys were sitting on their camp stretchers, watching movies, writing letters. Some had already gone to bed and were asleep. And just as the last hand of poker was being played, Robbie was standing up, the others were sitting down, which is why he was probably an easy target. And that's when Hekmatullah opened up on them with an M16 NATO issue rifle.
All of a sudden, just a loud machine gun burst, or a rifle burst. It was, but a semi-automatic burst, and it was quite surreal.
It was just chaotic. So he's shooting at us from 8 metres away, whatever it was, and then you have the towers opening up, and you just had shots from everywhere. And I initially thought it was machine gun fire coming over, basically raining on us.
Private Corey Neal and Sapper Robbie Dixon dived for cover.
We hit the deck pretty quick, and another burst went over our heads. You could hear the ricochet of the bullets everywhere, and you think you're going to get hit. You still don't know who's shooting. You don't know where the bullets are coming from. It's just so dark, and there's so much dust kicked up. It was all you can say is just scary.
Sergeant Hekmatullah fired 26 rounds, fatally wounding Private Pote, Sapper Martin and Lance Corporal Milosevic. 2 other soldiers were wounded but survived.
We had 1 medic on the ground. The rest of us were just combat first aiders or even army first aiders. even if you thought they might have passed away, the boys were still working on them until the choppers come. Yeah, the boys just did everything they possibly could.
By that stage, you could tell that it was too late, but to the guys' credit, no one stopped. No one stopped working. Even when they were on the stretchers getting carried out, we were still giving it our all to try and keep them alive.
To the dismay of the soldiers who survived the murderous attack, the killer, Sergeant Hekmatullah, escaped unscathed, and with the help of the Taliban was able to make his way to Pakistan, where he was greeted as a hero.
As for his motivation, look, I'm pretty keen to have a chat to him and determine that. And if he shows his face again, we'll do that. We'll have a chat.
In this propaganda interview recorded in Pakistan, Sergeant Hekmatullah said the diggers were off guard when he attacked them.
او وروسته د دې نه چې د کمپ شاوخوا دیوالونه چې د خاورو څخه جوړ شوي وو ورټوپ کړ او ترې نه واوښتم او یو نږدې کلي ته مې ځان ورساوه او وروسته د دې بیا د مجاهدینو سره یو ځای شوم.
In the months following the murders, Australia's and Pakistan's intelligence agencies worked together to track down Sergeant Hekmatullah, and in early 2013 he was arrested in Pakistan. After 3 months' interrogation, he was returned to Afghanistan, put on trial and sentenced to death.
What are you hoping will happen now?
Well, I'm hoping that the sentence will be carried out. He showed absolutely no mercy to our boys. He killed them in the prime of their lives. They had done nothing to him other than befriend him. And he turned around and just killed them in premeditated, cold-blooded murder. So, yeah, I'm rather hoping that the sentence will be carried out.
So far, the Afghanistan government has shown little inclination to carry out the execution. While the families wait, Hekmatullah bides his time in jail in Kabul, where journalist Jeremy Kelly and a film crew working with Four Corners found him in apparent good humour and good health. In this exclusive interview, the former sergeant said that in line with Islamic tradition, he hopes the soldiers' families will forgive him and allow him to get out of prison.
What would you do if you were released, Hekmatullah?
Former Sergeant Hekmatullah told Four Corners that his motive for murdering the 3 soldiers was a film he'd seen depicting the burning of copies of the Quran by the Americans and cartoons of the Prophet Muhammad.
I'm hoping you could explain why you did this action. How angry were you at seeing those pictures?
Do you believe that was his real motive?
No. Look, this man was, again, this is evidence of his ability to lie. Remember, he was interrogated for 3 months before he actually confessed to having done it. So he's just a liar.
So why do you think he did it?
Oh, he's probably trying to deflect the intention away from the fact that he was Taliban.
What do you believe?
That he deliberately joined the ANA to do what he did.
And did he do so as a member of the Taliban?
I believe so, yes. Based on documents that I've read since, a spur of the moment attack is not conceivable, considering that he had in place money and people who were able to get him out and over the border into Pakistan.
The former sergeant denies he's Taliban, although he admits the Taliban helped him escape. He also claims he was tortured while under interrogation in Pakistan.
Can you
explain what the torture was?
اخي دی ورځ به بولو څنګه بل ته بوتلو بس ورې بل لاسون د سترګې پټي وی لاس به ولچا کو نه او پښې ولچا کړلې بس به بدل زوی کې ډنډې تیر کنه د لاسونه چلته بند کړي شو سره بس بدلته د پښو منځ په ډنډه تیر او بس په دا رقم ټول سره پروت بس به واله تر باندې وی خلک نه د سیاوار شي لکه مشته چې بیلچا چي ده یو ورځ خالي ماته سزا را کړه سر به په ستل په وبوره چخنه ستل د وبوره کړو.
He says that when he was captured he was tortured. Does that concern you at all?
No.
In the 2 years since his son died, Hugh Pote has methodically investigated the circumstances of the soldiers' deaths. He believes the deaths resulted from a serious failure of planning and intelligence, and that insufficient force protection measures were mandated by senior commanders. He rejects the notion that the attack by Sergeant Hekmatullah was opportunistic and couldn't have been prevented.
It was planned. The evidence on the prosecution file for Hekmatullah clearly says it was planned. The Afghan National Army report itself into the incident shows that it was a planned terrorist attack.
When an investigation team went to Wahab shortly after the shooting, they were joined by Brigadier Roger Noble, the lead ISAF officer heading efforts to counter the insider threat in Afghanistan. He would later conclude,
"The worst sort of guy is Hekmatullah, and the reason is he thought about it. He had that afternoon to watch, and he watched the mobile picket. He tactically prepared for the attack, and he tried to incite further violence post-incident as he went over the wall. He was quite calculated in that."
The only people who said that it was a spur-of-the-moment thing were the Australian High Command, because the appropriate force protection procedures had not been mandated.
In other words, it was a serious failure of intelligence.
Absolutely. Yeah. Look at the result.
In September 2013, Defence handed down its own internal report into the murder of the 3 soldiers.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you for coming.
It concluded that there had not been a failure of intelligence prior to the mission.
Attack. The inquiry officer found there was no intelligence available to Australia or coalition to suggest there was a specific insider threat at Patrol Base Wahib, nor any information to prompt concern regarding the individual Hekmatullah.
However, it noted that before setting off for Wahab, the soldiers had limited information about the base, which meant that the platoon commander decided where his men should camp only after they arrived.
It would be usual for the 2 armies to have separate areas within the patrol base. However, given the terrain and the infrastructure, the Australian commander determined this was not possible.
When the shooting started, none of the watchtowers overlooking the camp were occupied by Australian soldiers, and a single roving picket was guarding the camp. He was dressed in PT gear with body armour. The Army brass singled this out for criticism.
The inquiry officer found having a single roving picket was not adequate in the circumstances on the 29th of August 2012. The inquiry officer identified a shortfall in his decision-making and actions that permitted soldiers to wear gym gear underneath their body armour. 2 Australian soldiers have since been disciplined over the picket's inappropriate dress.
The diggers who were disciplined were Platoon Commander Lieutenant Dominic Lopez and Sergeant Adam Burke. But according to those who've served in Afghanistan and commanded troops there, this criticism has little basis in reality.
The boys were sweating so bad, as you can imagine. We're sleeping under a tarp on stretchers, you know, you got to wind down, you got to eat your feet, you got to kind of air the body. Nah, there's no way, you know. I'd love to see that, yeah, the brass that's pointing the finger, go out and do it, yeah.
Wearing PT kit, I think that's spot on. Means they can rest properly. The matter of whether the guardian angel was or was not in uniform, frankly, I know there might have been a policy to say so, but it really doesn't matter, does it? If he's got his weapon and body armour, what more does he need? Whether he's wearing a pair of shorts or a pair of long trousers, who cares? Frankly, it's irrelevant.
Much more damning was the inquiry officer's conclusion that only the minimum force protection arrangements had been set in place, and his criticism of the failure to segregate the Australian and Afghan troops.
This included not setting up a secure area for Australians where they were separated from the Afghan National Army soldiers, and not restricting Afghan National Army soldiers' access to the Australian area.
Was it good enough for the minimum force protection arrangements to be implemented at Wahab?
Obviously not. No, the results clearly show not.
For Hugh Pote, his wife Jannie, and the families of James Martin and Rick Milosevic, the Army's investigation was entirely unsatisfactory.
We talked and we all agreed that the investigation report raised more questions than it answered.
Together, the families have battled to overturn the long tradition of the Army investigating itself. They won that battle when a coroner in Queensland agreed to inquire into the deaths. But the shroud of secrecy which Defence has thrown over their evidence to the coronial inquiry has angered them further.
When we went back to Defence to ask those questions, that was when we started to feel that things were, doors were being closed, and, you know, the old closing ranks.
Where there's no transparency, it follows that there's no accountability. Defence have never had to submit to civilian court before, or civilian oversight, and they take great exception to it on this occasion, which is why they're being so obstructive and uncooperative with this particular inquiry.
For the families, the job of investigating what occurred and why has been made much harder by the blackouts imposed on some evidence by Defence. These redactions have only been relaxed after pressure from the coroner.
This is the type of report the families received. Yes. All right, look at the redactions. Everywhere you go, everything's redacted. Now, we'll look up the same pages on what's in the brief of evidence, which is nowhere near as heavily redacted as that. Now, that's page 12. There's page 12 in what will become publicly available.
So, yes. Okay.
There's a bit of a difference, isn't there?
Yes. What does that tell you?
That there's no justification whatsoever for that. I think it's an absolute insult and an outrage to give families of fallen soldiers a document of that nature.
Among the documents which the Army has refused to disclose are fragmentary orders, or FRAGOs, written by NATO and ISAF's senior command. 2.5 weeks before the murders, FRAGOs were issued drawing attention to the critical and growing threat of insider attacks. This secret FRAGO, not presented to the inquest but obtained exclusively by Four Corners, warns that insider incidents have significant operational and strategic impacts on the coalition. They pose a serious threat to mission success. It adds, the purpose of this FRAGO is direct, immediate force protection enhancements across the combined joint operations area in response to an upsurge in insider incidents over the last 7 days.
We're talking about immediately post-Ramadan, and we're talking about a period of an escalation in insider attacks against coalition forces. It was only a matter of time before it hit us, and common sense suggests that what they should have done was beefed up those force protection arrangements prior to attack rather than after the attack. It's too late then. They've lost 3 men, one and our son.
A second fragmentary order obtained by Four Corners says a key task is to conduct continuous insider threat risk assessment.
A risk analysis has to be done for every mission you do. You always do that. And it doesn't matter if it's a mission to go on a patrol or a mission to occupy a patrol base. What are the risks? What do I know about it? What am I doing to reduce those risks? Those are the questions that any commander worth their salt should be able to answer.
In addition, the Frago instructs regional commanders to implement protected safe areas for off-duty ISAF personnel working within Afghan bases. But at Patrol Base Wahab, where the soldiers technically were on duty even when relaxing, this didn't happen. Did senior commanders betray the trust which was placed in them by soldiers on the ground?
In this particular instance, yes.
It's my intention that will only...
Some of the evidence at last week's coronial hearing was given behind closed doors. But even so, significant new information has emerged. The court heard that 3 previous army patrols had been to Wahab, but none of their intelligence about the base was passed on. The platoon's commander, Lieutenant, now Captain Dominic Lopez, said he was unaware these other patrols had been there.
The company that we conducted handover with had not been to Wahab, and my understanding was that the task force as a whole had also not been to Wahab. If we were able to access their patrol reports upon knowing that we were deploying to Patrol Base Wahab, we would have.
I would have asked, what do we know about the place we're going to? How did it get there? Was it built by someone else? I understand it was built by Australians.
That's right.
It would therefore seem reasonable to say that Australians, someone in the Australian uniform, knew what the physical makeup of this place was.
When Milo, Mato and Poti went to Wahab, the threat of an insider attack was judged to be low. But back at base on August the 29th, the mentoring team's intelligence officer, Corporal Samuel Matheson, prepared an assessment in which he judged that the threat was high. Corporal Matheson concluded that
ANA at Patrol Base Wahab have the capability and resources to conduct an insider attack, due to the layout of the base facilitating interaction between Australians and the ANA.
This assessment was both prophetic and too late. It was made just 2 hours before the shooting took place, and tragically, it never reached the soldiers on the ground. Even more seriously, a key task order which decreed that guards should work in pairs to protect Australian soldiers working with their Afghan counterparts was also not passed down to the platoon.
I think this is the main issue. The intelligence that was known further up the chain of command just didn't make it down there. And I think had it got down, they would have taken their security far more seriously than they did.
I think that it's about time that Army was scrutinised in a civilian court. And clearly, we can see that there are deficiencies in the system and they need to be addressed. Has the ADF learnt from their mistakes in the past? Or are they just going to continue to bury their mistakes?
In the aftermath of Sergeant Hekmatullah's murderous attack, the focus of Australia's mission in Afghanistan changed from mentoring the ANA at close quarters to force protection.
We went from day-to-day training them in first aid and in search techniques and infantry minor tactics to pretty much double staggered pickets, body armour all the time, weapons ready to go all the time. And it wasn't personally, I don't think it was a very good look.
This enormous wall at forward operating base Miraways was built to separate the Aussie diggers from their Afghan counterparts. And soon, Australia's forces started to withdraw entirely from bases like this one. The task group's commander, Lieutenant Colonel Scott, insisted at the time that this had nothing to do with Sergeant Hekmatullah's attack and the consequent loss of trust between the forces.
There has been a change in the dynamics at the local level. I mean, that green on blue incident on 29th of August, nothing to do with the transition or their development. We're not pulling off them because of insider threat or an insurgent threat or any of that. We're pulling off them because they're well on track to be independent.
These men would still be alive today, in my view, if the force protection measures that were implemented immediately following the incident had been in place and should have been in place at the time of the incident.
What should Lieutenant Colonel Scott have done?
Well, he should have implemented the force protection procedures which he mandated after the event. Quite obviously.
Hugh and Jannie Pote's garden is a constant reminder of Private Robbie Pote, who went to war for his country and didn't return.
This was his favourite place. I find myself talking to him in different things and what should I do here? Sad that he can't see it like this, but it's a way we can just remember Robbie in a sort of a happy environment, really. It's a living memorial rather than just a plaque.
The public record of the sacrifice of the fallen is here at Australia's War Memorial in Canberra, where the names of Private Pote, Lance Corporal Milosevic and Sapper Martin are engraved on the Roll of Honour. Robbie Pote used to go to dawn ceremonies here.
He was very taken by, let's call it the Anzac spirit, and he thought he'd like to become part of that and share in it.
And James Martin visited the memorial while on training at Kapuka.
He was someone who reflected on the gallantry of others and the sacrifices made by others, and it was something that he took very seriously. And he happened to be standing right in the place where I was standing when I laid the wreath for the private ceremony when his name was added to the War Memorial.
But did the mission justify the sacrifice?
Was it a mission that was worth soldiers putting their lives at risk for?
In hindsight, mate, probably not.
Was it worth it? Was it worth the sacrifice?
Oh, definitely not.
It would have been so much easier to accept if the boys had died doing what they loved, being out on a patrol, being able to fight back. It was just such a sad way to see them go.
Was the mentoring mission worth the loss of life?
No, definitely not.
Sometimes the simplest questions are the hardest to answer, and if you've lost a son, maybe no answer will satisfy the question. We did seek an interview with the Department of Defence, but they won't be commenting until after the coroner's findings are revealed, and for that the families will have to wait until next year. A Defence spokesman did say in response to the claims of Sergeant Hekmatullah that he'd been tortured, that he had never been in Australian custody. Next week, a Four Corners investigation on Khaled Sharoof, who shocked Australia and the world with the pictures of himself and his young son holding the heads of executed victims. We explore his involvement in radical Islam and in Sydney's criminal underworld, which has made him the gangster jihadist he is today. Until then, good night.